You know, when you hear the word gunpowder, what comes to mind? Probably cannons, right? Muskets? But what if I told you it did way more than just change weapons? This one invention, it was an explosion that literally forged the modern world, reshaping everything from castles and knights to how we even think about what a country is.
Just think about it for a second. What if a single invention could just erase 1,000 years of military tradition? I mean, completely upend it. Imagine the armored knight, the apex predator of the battlefield for centuries, and the massive stone castle, the ultimate symbol of power. What if one thing could make them both totally obsolete? Well, that's exactly what gunpowder did.
Okay, so to really get how huge this change was, we gotta go back. Let's paint a picture of the world before gunpowder. War back then, it was a pretty local thing, almost seasonal. It was all about the warrior elite, the knights, and their power was symbolized by these massive, towering stone castles. And this system, it wasn't new. It had been the way of the world for hundreds of years.
And this right here, this lays it all out, side by side. Look at medieval war. It was local, seasonal. Seriously, you had to stop fighting so guys could go home for the harvest. It was fought by a handful of elite knights, and honestly, the logistics were pretty cheap, relatively speaking. Then, boom, gunpowder. Suddenly war is a year-round, massive industrial thing. It's fought by huge armies of regular guys, not just nobles. And this is key, it became unbelievably, mind-bogglingly expensive. The kind of expensive that changes how countries are even run. So this new reality just kicks off this insane technological arms race. I mean, all the old rules, gone, thrown right out the window. Now if you wanted to survive, you had to innovate, and you had to do it fast. It became this vicious cycle of offense versus defense, with everyone just scrambling to get an edge. So here's how it went down. First, cannons show up on the scene, and they just pulverize the tall, thin walls of old-school medieval castles. They just weren't built for that. So what do? Well, engineers get creative. They come up with this brilliant new design, the Trace Italien. You might know it as the Star Fort. Instead of tall and thin, these things were low, thick, with angled walls designed to absorb or even deflect cannonballs. Genius, right? But the arms race doesn't sleep. Artillery gets even better, now with explosive shells, and suddenly even the Star Forts are in trouble. This forced another redesign, leading to even stronger polygonal forts. It was just this constant back-and-forth evolution, and man, was it expensive. And it wasn't just the big guns. At the very same time, personal firearms are evolving at a breakneck pace. We start in the 1400s with these clunky, awkward hand cannons. 100 years later, you've got muskets that can punch right through plate armor. By the mid-1600s, the flintlock musket comes along, which is way more reliable. But the real game changer, that hits in the 1690s, the bayonet. Think about that. All of a sudden, a soldier doesn't need a long pike for protection anymore. His gun is his spear. The musketeer just became a one-man army, a totally self-sufficient killing machine. And that was the final nail in the coffin for the knight in shining armor. I mean, literally. The best plate armor in the world, the result of centuries of incredible craftsmanship, was now just a heavy, useless hunk of metal. A peasant, a commoner, with maybe a few weeks of training with a musket, could now take down a nobleman who would spend his entire life training for war. The whole system was turned on its head. The age of the warrior elite, it was over. Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. This whole military revolution, its impact went way, way beyond the battlefield. Because all this new stuff, the cannons, these incredible new forts, these huge armies, it all came with a crazy price tag. And that price tag was so high, it was going to completely reshape politics, society, everything.
Just look at this number. 500,000. 500,000 soldiers. By the year 1700, a king like Louis XIV of France could put an army that big in the field. To put that in perspective, in medieval times, an army of maybe 20 or 30,000 was considered huge. This was on a totally different scale. And to manage, and more importantly, to pay for an army this big, you needed a completely new way of running a country.
And here's the shopping list for that new army. First, you needed professional soldiers, guys who are paid and on contract all year long. No more feudal levies where a lord shows up with his buddies for 40 days and then goes home. Nope. You needed state-run factories churning out weapons, massive supply chains to get gunpowder and food to the front lines. And to run all that, you needed a massive organized bureaucracy. And the biggest question, how do you pay for it all? With new national taxes and complex banking systems. This is literally the birth of what historians call the fiscal military state, a government built from the ground up for one main purpose, waging war. And really, it all boils down to one simple fact.
Your average feudal lord, even a really rich and powerful one, he just couldn't afford this new kind of war. No way. The only ones who could were centralized states, governments that had the power to tax an entire country. So what happened? Power just drained away from all the local nobles and flowed right to the center, to the king or the state. Feudalism, for all intents and purposes, was bankrupt.
So, you've got these new, more powerful states with bigger and bigger armies. The inevitable result? War itself changes. It gets deadlier, a lot deadlier. And its reach goes global. Those small, seasonal squabbles of the past, they were ancient history. Now you had these massive, devastating wars that could stretch across entire continents. I mean, you can see the escalation right here. It's terrifying. You look at something like the 30 Years' War back in the 1600s, and it was absolutely devastating for its time. But fast forward to the Napoleonic Wars, and you have entire nations being mobilized for what we'd call total war. The armies were bigger, the supply chains were more complex. The sheer power to cause destruction was just off the charts.
And don't think for a second this was just a European thing. Oh no. The gunpowder revolution went global, and it went global fast. You see it in the Japanese invasions of Korea. You see it with the Mughal conquests in India, in the Otto-Ethiopian War in Africa, from the Ottoman Empire fighting the Habsburgs, all the way to the Americas. This new way of fighting spread like wildfire across the entire planet.
So, when you take a step back, what's the real lasting legacy of all this? Well, it's the world we're living in right now. The move to gunpowder didn't just give us new weapons. It created the very countries we see on a map today. It built new economies, and it completely changed our ideas about who gets to have power and why.
There's this amazing quote from a historian, J.F.C. Fuller, that I think sums it up perfectly. He said, quote, "The musket made the infantryman, and the infantryman made the democrat." Whoa, that's a pretty heavy idea, right? So, what in the world does he mean by that?
What he means is that the survival of a country no longer depended on a handful of fancy aristocratic knights. It now depended on huge armies made up of regular common people. And think about it, when hundreds of thousands of ordinary people are the ones risking their lives to defend the nation, eventually they're going to start asking for a say in how that nation is run. It wasn't a straight line for sure, it was a long and complicated process, but you can absolutely draw a connection from the rise of that common soldier to the rise of democracy itself.
And that really leaves us with one big final question for today. We've seen how the gunpowder revolution built our modern world of nation-states and politics. So now, as we're living through our own military revolution, with things like drones, cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, what kind of world is that going to build? What comes next?